So this whole month is dedicated to relationships. When I was in ministerial school, I had two jobs while I was in school. One job was to be the tour guide for the entire Unity Village, which at that time was 1,600 acres. It's about 1,200 acres now. And lots of buildings and facilities and tunnels and history and so forth. And I would take people through the village and explain about the development of the Unity movement, the Fillmores, the founders of Unity, and so forth. And then the other job I had was to work in Silent Unity, which is Unity's 24-hour, 7-day-a-week prayer ministry that has been in operation for a very long time. It is in fact the oldest ongoing prayer ministry in the United States. And when I worked in the prayer room, I answered the phones, and we would get calls from all over the world. The most common category of prayer that we were asked to hold in prayer had to do with relationships. People struggling with their relationships, struggling with a spouse or an intimate partner or a child or a neighbor or a coworker, just struggling and wanting to have greater peace and harmony and resolution in their relationships. Of all the things that people could pray for, even more than healing, though Unity began as a healing movement, the number one prayer request, at least when I was in the prayer ministry, had to do with the healing of relationships. And so I think that it strikes a chord in all of us. We probably all have relationships in our lives that are easy and rich and deep and fun and wonderful and help us to just be built up and feel on purpose and like we can conquer the world. And then we probably have those relationships in our lives that really are truly the sandpaper to our soul. Remember that expression I always use? Sandpaper to our soul, just trying to rub off the rough edges as we learn how to love and deal with one another in a better way. Jesus said, you don't have any reward for loving those who love you. That work is easy. The reward, not a financial reward, but the reward is a reward in growth, comes when we learn to love those that are difficult for us to love, because we have to build a capacity within ourselves to do that work, to find a way to love in that way. This month is about having healthier and better relationships. And it's one thing to talk about love. It's another thing to also support that with some practical things we can learn to do to build up our skills so we can be more effective in our relationships. And so today and throughout this month, we're looking at what are some of those things that we can learn and get better at, not only from a practical sense, but also from a spiritual sense. So the three main things I want to focus on today, and each and every one of them could be their own series. So I'm just touching upon each of these. But these three things are important in terms of strengthening our relationships. Number one is building and maintaining trust. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. Building and maintaining trust. A second component is transparency and vulnerability. Transparency and vulnerability. And a third has to do with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. So trust, building and maintaining trust. Trust is a huge factor in relationships. Would you not agree? A huge factor in relationships. It's the glue the emotional glue that holds relationships together. And to the extent that trust is strong, then the relationship is more solid. And it doesn't matter in terms of whether we're talking about personal relationships, family relationships, business relationships. Trust is an essential component of it. Trust is built over time and is a byproduct of certain behaviors, certain ways of being in relationship, and trust can be lost pretty quickly. And once lost, it can be really a difficult road to get it back. Nod your head if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. It takes time to build it, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time to lose it. You heard me say last week, it's very true for me personally. It is easier for me to regain love in a relationship than it is trust. Trust is the glue that really holds us together. So how do we get there? We develop trust in a relationship by being trustworthy. How do we become trustworthy? We become trustworthy by earning trust. How do you think we earn trust? Give me some examples. How do you earn trust? Being honest, absolutely. Do what you say. That's a big one. I remember years ago seeing a poster that had as its caption, the number one rule to success, big bold letters, and then lots of teeny, tiny print, like 6-point type print. Remember when classified ads in the newspaper were 6-point size print, tiny. It was like that on this poster, and you had to go way up to it to read what it said, success. Deliver the goods, deliver the goods, deliver the goods. Basically saying, do what you said you were going to do. So honesty, do what you said you were going to do. Any other thoughts about how we earn trust in a relationship? Be honest, right? We said that. Give and take. I think those are pieces of it too. Let me share with you some of mine. Being consistent. Being consistent. The Bible suggests that consistency in little things, being faithful in little things, helps us to earn the right to be trusted with bigger things. In Luke 6:10, we're told, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Meaning, if I can trust you to do the little thing you said you were going to do, and you do that little thing, whatever that little thing may be, consistently, you're going to prove to me through that act of faithfulness in those little things that, whoa, I can probably trust you with a little bit more. Whether that's a little more responsibility or authority or resources or whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. It's the when I can be trusted and faithful in the little things consistently, I earn the right to be trusted with the bigger things. We earn trust by being reliable, which is, to Diana's point, doing what we said we were going to do. And not just in the big things, but in the little things. This is a real biggie for me personally, whether it's in business or in the church or in any part of my life, is the idea of being reliable, keeping my word. And when I say that, I don't just mean not telling a lie, but if I say I'm going to attend this thing, or I'm going to help you with that thing, or I'm going to give you this thing, or I'm going to show up at that time. It doesn't mean I show up 10 minutes late. It doesn't mean I don't do what I said I was going to do. Does life ever happen and keep you from doing what you said you were going to do? For all of us. But then if we're really committed to being a trustworthy person, a person of our word, a person of our deed, then what do we do in those circumstances? We're simply honest and forthright in saying, I said I was going to do X, and maybe I overpromised, but I say to you, maybe I overpromised. I said I was going to help in this way, and I'm really sorry, but this just happened, and I'm not able to. Does that make sense? How many of you would say that as a society, we're getting kind of lax with this? Is anybody else seeing this the way I'm seeing this? Yeah, yes, on the individual level and on the big level. on the individual level, on the big level. So we earn people's trust by being reliable, which means we're keeping our word, which means we do whatever it is we said we were going to do. We earn people's trust by being close, by spending some time with each other so that we can get to know each other. And I would dare say that the spending time with each other, that texting is the lowest level of spending time with each other. And Zooming is the next lowest level of spending time with each other. But being together is the way that we really can connect. And connecting person to person, heart to heart, even if we disagree, even if we don't really like each other sometimes. Do you ever have people you love that at times you don't like them? Of course you do. Of course you do. That's a normal thing. We can be irritating, and we can be with people who are irritating, but that doesn't mean we don't love them. It doesn't mean we don't love them. But by being close, we have the advantage of, what's the word I'm trying to look for? We don't just see the person, we don't just hear the person, we're actually engaged in the energy exchange of that person. We can read, even if we don't know how we're reading it, between the lines, so to speak, right? We pick up that much more in terms of what are they really communicating. And those are elements of building trust, of getting to know the other person, getting to be able to rely on the other person. We earn people's trust by being trustworthy, by keeping one another's confidences. By keeping one another's confidences. I was in 2 all-day trainings last week for Unity Worldwide Ministries, which is our national ministerial organization. And one whole part of the beginning of one of the workshops was about communication and creating opportunities for dialogue when people really disagree, because we were addressing as ministers, how do you help your congregations be more skillful in dealing with some of the hot topic issues? And so we were being offered a whole bunch of different training. And one of the things that was shared in that training was something I had never quite heard before, and it was someone being asked in an interview what it meant to keep one's confidence, what confidentiality meant. And the person said, well, confidentiality is when you tell me not to share something with another person, and I don't share it with the other person, I keep it with me. How many of you would say that's confidentiality? Yeah, that's what I thought too. They said, no, it's something more than that. When somebody shares something with you, unless they give you specific permission to share it with someone else, you don't. That's a whole bigger thing, right? Does that not make sense, or did it take the breath away from you as it did from me? No, so the idea of confidentiality being, it's not just when a person says, please don't share this with anybody else, and so you honor that and you don't share it with anybody else. But it is in the absence of that person saying, please don't share this with anybody else. I'm telling you something's going on in my life, Mike, and I haven't given you permission to share, so you think you can. And the point that the presenter was making was no, unless you are given specific permission, you assume that you're not. All that suggested to me was, wow, how valuable that is in terms of really checking oneself as to the motivation of sharing and passing on a story I hear from someone to another person. It speaks to this idea of storytelling. It speaks to the idea of gossiping. Have you ever been on the receiving end of a rumor mill? Raise your hand if you have. I certainly have. I don't know of any minister who has never been on the receiving end of a rumor mill. What is the teaching here? That in the absence of information, people will fill in their own story. If you've ever been a manager of anyone or anything, you know that there are times that you can't tell the whole story of what happened, right? And in the absence of being able to tell the whole story of what happened, you can have people make up all sorts of stories about what they think happened. Does that make sense? So this idea of building and maintaining trust in relationships is key to our relationships being healthy. And some of the components of that is being true to our word, being honest, being reliable, not sharing information with others that we don't have permission to share with others, holding one another's confidences in our heart. Proverbs 11:13 says, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret, keeps private things that are meant to be private. So we've taken a look a little bit at the importance of trust in a relationship and some of the things we can maybe do a little self-inventory on to ask of ourselves, are there some places that I can improve? Are there some things that I can do, ways I can behave that would cause me to be even more trustworthy than I already am? The second is transparency and vulnerability. Transparency and vulnerability. They're related, but they're not exactly the same thing. In relationships, the degree to which we are transparent and the degree to which we are vulnerable will directly impact how intimate and how close we are in that relationship. Think about the people in your life that you are genuinely the closest to. I want to pause for a moment so you can think of a person or persons in your life that you are really, really close to. I'm quite certain that you trust that person. And I'm quite certain that that person trusts you. I also believe about that person that they have shown you a lot of who they really are. Vulnerable and transparent. Am I correct? I know I'm correct. Those are the components, some of the components that allow us to just feel a closeness with another person. I told you that vulnerability and transparency are related, but they're not the same thing. I want to drill down just a little bit to kind of paint a picture of that for you. So when I'm using the word transparency, I'm referring to open and honest communication. Jesus talked about the idea of let your yes be yes and your no be no. That is pretty clear and transparent, would you not say? Very clear communication. Transparency refers to openness and honesty in what we say and how we say what we say. It involves being clear, direct, and forthcoming with our thoughts and with our feelings. Its purpose is clarity, making sure there's no deception, no hiding, no withholding of information. I am being transparent with you. I'm being completely present with you. No clouding what's really going on here, making sure there's no deception, no hiding or withholding of information. Here's what it might look like. Being upfront about your needs, your desires, your boundaries. I think of our family dog, Truffles. I think she has taught me more. I haven't mastered it the way she has, but she has mastered clear, direct communication. There is no question what that little pooch wants when she crawls in my lap or next to me and puts her paw out like this. I'm well trained. That means, Mom, pet me. And if I stop, she doesn't growl. She doesn't get up and leave in a huff. She clearly and directly recommunicates the same message. I comply until I decide to stop. She doesn't hold it against me. She doesn't get up and leave. She looks at me like, are you serious? And repeats in a clear and direct way, no negative. Do you see my point? I look at her, and the family has heard me say this many times, I wish I could be that good. That able to consistently simply, clearly communicate without being afraid. I mean, there are going to be times that I don't pet her, and then eventually she'll go to somebody else, or she'll just go, to her bed and go to sleep. But the ability in our relationships to be transparent, to be clear in our communications is so important. And it takes a certain vulnerability that we'll talk about here in just a second to do that. But when we're not clear, when we're not direct, when we withhold a boundary we need or a request that we have or a thought or feeling that we're worried about, when we withhold that, we deprive the other of really knowing where we are. We diminish the chance that we can get whatever it is that we need or want from happening. I hope all of us in this room and online have grown up enough that we realize even our most intimate partner cannot read our mind. Yeah, I know that one always goes, right? Cannot read our minds. And so it's up to us in our relationships to be transparent, to be able to ask for what we need, to discuss things directly, to share our thoughts, our plans, our ideas. And it may mean that we have to do some practice exercises. It may mean that we need to get a book or sign up for a class to help us learn how to do it better. But whatever it takes to get better at it, I promise you it's well worth it. Then vulnerability in our relationships. And vulnerability, like trust, I think happens over time. Vulnerability is sharing what you're really thinking and feeling, the good part and the not so good part, the things that you are happy about and are dreaming about, as well as the things that worry you and keep you up at night or make you feel ashamed or make you feel guilty or make you feel sad. I believe that we all need at least one other person that we can be that way with, that loves us exactly as we are growing into the better versions of ourselves. Vulnerability in relationships involves sharing our inner self, even when it might feel risky to do so. And in fact, I would say especially when it feels risky to do so, to share what it is that we are really feeling, what it is that we really need. It's expressing our needs, it's admitting mistakes, it's being upfront about our dreams, our past, our worries, knowing that we all have imperfections. We all have areas where we fall short. We are all flawed in a certain kind of way. But it doesn't mean that we're inherently bad or negative. It just means that we're human, that we make mistakes, and that we can be honest and transparent and vulnerable about those mistakes. And in the relationships that we are able to show up that way, I think those relationships are the most precious relationships we have and the most beautiful ones. I think of the Japanese art, I think I'm saying the word right, of kintsugi, which is the art of taking broken pottery and putting it back together, painstakingly putting the pieces back together, but putting them back together with gold. Can you get a picture of how beautiful that would look? A piece of porcelain or china that has broken and carefully putting it back together, but putting it back together with gold. Suddenly those flaws become what? Part of the art itself, part of the beauty itself. To me, that's a beautiful illustration of the ideas of transparency and vulnerability. So as you think about your relationships and taking them to the next deeper level of closeness and intimacy, maybe there's a little bit of room for growth in one of those areas. And then the last, I'm only going to be able to touch upon this, is the idea of emotional intelligence, what's commonly referred to now as EQ. And it's about understanding yourself emotionally and attempting to do the very best job you can to understand and have compassion for the other emotionally. the concept of being responsible for one's emotional wake. Raise your hand if you've heard that expression before, emotional wake. Raise it high. Okay, just a few of you. This is a powerful visual. I think it was one of the most powerful visuals that I had learned years ago. Emotional wake. The concept of being responsible for one's emotional wake is a metaphor that compares the impact of a person's actions, words, and emotions on others to the wake left behind a boat as it moves through the water. Isn't that powerful? So think about, have you ever been in a meeting or a family gathering where somebody was acting and speaking in a very harsh, hurtful, critical, judgmental, unskilled way? Have you ever? And then that person leaves the room. Is there anything that still lingers in that room? Oh yeah, it's that emotional wake, right? Emotional maturity says that each of us is aware that how we conduct ourselves, the energy with which we do things, the way we say things, what we say, the motivation, goes beyond just the actual words. It leaves a wake of energy behind us, and we are as responsible for the words as we are for the wake. Would you not say that that would cause us to be ever more aware of the way that we show up in relationships? I think it does. I think it does. To be aware of the wake that we leave behind. It's to notice or pay attention to the impact that we have on others, the motivation we have for engaging the way that we engage, and reflecting upon that. And if we find that, we're kind of like this, with our emotions, kind of like a bull in a china store, that we step back and go, wait a minute, how can I learn to conduct myself with a little more grace and a little more skill? What is it in me that needs to be worked on? What is going on inside me that's causing me to show up in this way, that the wake I leave behind is damaging? I remember this little story I read about a young boy who had quite a temper and was kind of a bully at school. And so his father wanted to teach him a lesson about the impact of those kinds of actions. And so for every time that his son acted like a bully or was mean-spirited or did things that were just kind of really unkind and unfair, he would take his son out to the backyard and give him a hammer and give him a nail and tell him to go ahead and nail or hammer the nail in the fence. And so he did this with his son for a number of weeks, and there were a lot of nails on that fence. And then when the father decided that the exercise was over, he said, okay, now we're going to go out, and now I want you to pull out all of those nails. And then the father said, and what do you see? Oh, Dad, I see all of the holes that were left behind. And the point the father was trying to make to his son was it's not just that initial act, it's that it has a lingering effect. Our unity movement grew up as a healing movement, and it grew up as a healing movement on the energy of the power of the spoken word. Unity was probably one of the first movements that really emphasized this idea of affirmations and affirmative prayer. It's how Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, healed herself of tuberculosis. She was told she was going to die in 6 months, and in 2 years, she healed herself of tuberculosis through affirmative prayer. We believe in the power of our words to do good, but the truth is also our words can do what? Our words can hurt. Our words can hurt. And when in doubt, just be quiet. Boy, am I vulnerable saying that when all I've been doing for the last 25 minutes is talking to you, right? But when in doubt, be quiet. It's a practice of the Quakers, which I think is beautiful. Do not speak unless you can improve upon the silence. Oh my, would the world be quiet, don't you think? Do not speak. Could you imagine, I'll just say this and then I'm going to leave it, that in the Senate and the House, do not speak unless you can improve upon the silence? I don't care which side you're on, right? Do not speak unless you can improve upon the silence. And in the silence, pray. Pray for guidance, pray for energy, pray for a deeper understanding. So anyway, I hope that there's something you heard today that will just help you to strengthen your relationships and thereby make your life even better than it is right now. Namaste.